Mate Jaivata Swamini Namacharya Padaya Kripa Pradaya Gorakata Dabna Nagarajaramsaride Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishna Bhutareshi Mate Gopi Paragada Sekinamide Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishna Bhutareshi Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravadi Pacharide Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshataride Vachaka Yascha Kripa Sindhu Devacha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Ukam Karoti Vachalam Pandum Nagayate Giram Yatkripatamaham Bande Shri Gurudharinam Yatkripatamaham Bande Paramanandamadaram Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Caitanya Smriti Yasmit Dushkaram Sukaram Bhaveda Smriti Pritam Syat Sri Chaitanya Namaha. Okay. Any volunteers to read today? Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji,
you want to read?
Yeah, I can read, Prabhuji.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yes. Just a minute. From where I have to start, Prabhu? Because I don't remember. I don't have the book also. Okay. Other devotees, however, including temple presidents, were disturbed by the complaints. Someone recalled Prabhupada had already addressed this point in 1970. Do all activities with great enthusiasm. All our activities must be open so that no one may criticize our mission. So all dealings must be to the standard of Vaishnavism, as everything is undertaken forthrightly in Krishna consciousness, in a Krishna conscious way. Then Lord Krishna will be pleased to provide all facilities for aiding such sincere service. Srila Prabhupada wanted the book book distributors to execute his order, but he was not giving them a license to do anything and everything and claim it was for Krishna. Preaching required expertise, not only in getting people to take a book, but in giving them the right impression. The book distributors maintained that they were doing the best they could, but that they would try to improve. If other devotees thought they could do better, then they should demonstrate how to distribute books without disturbing anyone. Disturbing books or distributing books all day after day, was hard. People were already agitated by their minds and senses and harassed by their occupations, governments, and personal relationships. No wonder even an innocent devotee sometimes disturbed them. The tactics in question were mostly the book distributors' lines. The distributors would say that they were students, that they were helping get young people off drugs, or that the books were about how to solve modern day crises. None of these things were untrue, but the emphasis was sometimes excessive. A mature devotee could speak more directly. Tripurari would tell how the books described an ancient civilization in which people knew how life should be lived. He would present himself as a representative of an organization that had communities all over the world where people could benefit from the example of an alternative lifestyle. Tripurari and others were also able to be both personal and, in a casual way, philosophical as they spoke about spiritual life. They made quick friends with strangers and convinced them to take books. But more and more devotees were taking up book distribution, and many were inexperienced. Srila Prabhupada's philosophy was clear, but different interpretations persisted. Without referring to specific technique, Prabhupada simply stressed the purity of book distribution and encouraged the book distributors to continue without interruption. The main thing was to distribute books. Devotees continued to press Srila Prabhupada for further clarification. The book distributors were concerned that the urgency of book distribution not be minimized, whereas other responsible ISKCON leaders were concerned that loose practices might hamper the society's progress. Prabhupada replied to questions by Balimardana of New York with a letter that became particularly influential. The real preaching is selling books. You should know the tactic how to sell without irritating. What your lecture will do for 3 minutes, but if he reads one page, his life may be turned. We don't want to irritate anyone. However, if he if he goes away by your aggressive tactics, then you are nonsense and it's your failure. Neither you could sell a book, neither he would remain. But if he buys a book, that is the real successful preaching. Prabhupada's position was clear. The book should be sold, but expertly. And lest there be any doubt, Prabhupada reiterated that the book distribution was the best preaching. The success of your preaching will be substantiated by how many books are sold. Prabhupada also wrote, the art is to sell many, many books and not to irritate the public. As books continue to go out by the millions, many people express their thanks on receiving a book. Only occasionally would someone complain. But within ISKCON, the dialogue regarding book distribution techniques continued. When Sri Govinda, the president of ISKCON Chicago, wrote Prabhupada, Prabhupada encouraged him in his attempt to reform the devotees engaged in excessive practices. So it is not very much advisable to make lies just to sell books. If we simply stick to describing how wonderful is Krishna, that will not be a lie. But other things, lies, they will not help us to train ourselves in truthfulness. Lie to some, not to others, that is not a good philosophy. Rather, the Brahmins are always truthful, even to their enemies. There is sufficient merit in our books that if you simply describe them sincerely to anyone, they will buy. That art you must develop, not art of lying. Convince them to give by your preaching the absolute truth, not by tricking. That is the more mature stage of development of Krishna consciousness. November 1973. Scores of men and women were going out every day to distribute books. One November day, the devotees of the New York City Temple broke the ISKCON world record by distributing 13,200 pieces of literature. On the same day, they also distributed 15,000 pieces of prasadam. The ISKCON total for 1973 was 41,69,000 books sold. When Srila Prabhupada received these figures, he replied to Rameshwara, I have faith in your word that next year the figures will be far beyond what they were last year. It is the nature of the spiritual energy. It's always increasing if we just apply our energy. Early in January 1974, Srila Prabhupada again returned to Los Angeles. One morning, he gave a Srimad Bhagavatam lecture stressing book distribution. There is no literature throughout the universe like Srimad Bhagavatam, he said. There is no comparison or competition. Every word is for the good of the human society. Each and every word, therefore, we stress so much in the book distribution. Somehow or other, if the book goes in one's hand, he will be benefited. At least he will see, I have taken so much prize. Let me see what is there. If he reads one shloka, his life will become successful. If he reads one shloka, one word, this is such a nice thing. Therefore, we are stressing so much. Please distribute books, distribute books, distribute books. In the year 1974 began with what appeared to be a serious setback. The Supreme Court ruled against Vietnamese war protesters distributing political leaflets in private malls. Citizens of non-profit groups, religious included, could solicit on private property only with permission from the proprietor. The malls that the book distributors had frequented were suddenly off limits. The same constitution that barred the devotees from private property, however, gave them access to public property. And when ISKCON devotees filed a lawsuit against the city-owned Las Vegas airport, they won an immediate injunction on the basis that the airport was denying them their right to free speech. This ruling promised to open a new era in book distribution with possibilities of legalizing Sankirtana in all major airports. Devotees saw this as proof that Krishna was working through Prabhupada to increase book distribution. No previous spiritual master had ever distributed Vedic literature on so great a scale. This was another sign that Srila Prabhupada was Krishna's empowered representative. And by the devotees' effort to follow Prabhupada's order, Krishna was empowering them also, but only if they were willing to go through the trials of surrender and renunciation. Prabhusha. I went out one day to the airport and I walked up to one black man and said, "Excuse me, sir." And bam, he punched me right in the face and knocked me down. At that moment, so many thoughts went through my mind. I could just hear Tripurari's words ringing in my ears from the class that morning. We must be determined. So I just said to myself, well, I'll just stand right back up and keep trying. I stood up and I got the inspiration to just turn around and try to hand the next person one of Prabhupada's books. Prabhuji, can you scroll? Another time, a husband and wife approached me, but the husband didn't want anything to do with me. When the woman saw that the book was spiritual, she stopped and said, "What's this book about?" I said very bluntly, "This book explains birth and death and what's beyond." She said, "Oh." Then she turned to her husband and said, "Please buy it." But he said, "I don't want it. Come on, let's go." She said, "Please." But her husband said, "You buy it." And he walked off. So she stayed with me and said, "Could you tell me a little more about this?" I started to explain the book. And then I said, "Where are you coming from?" She said, "I'm coming from Rochester. Rochester." Then she revealed to me that she was coming from the Mayo Clinic and that she had terminal cancer and was going to die. She said, "I desperately want to read this book." She gave me $10 and said, "Thank you very much." Then she took the book and ran off. A little later, she came back and found me and shook my hand and thanked me. This kind of experiences that devotees would have day in and day out gave us the feeling of being like emissaries or representatives of something very special. By this, we became more attached to Srila Prabhupada and to executing his work. We would see these miracles take place. Keshav Bharati. I used to distribute books in San Francisco airport. I thought that this airport was particularly difficult and that if I could be in LA, I could probably distribute as many books as Tripurari. I was a little proud. Then I got the chance to distribute with him. I am very outgoing and gregarious. So I don't have any problem stopping people or anything like that. But half an hour and then an hour went by and Tripurari had distributed five and then 10 books. But I couldn't get anybody to stop and shake my hand even. I was incredible. It was incredible. But I knew it was because I was too proud. Another hour went by and still no one would stop and shake my hand. I was bewildered because I wanted to pass out Prabhupada's book. Finally, I just sat down out of frustration. I was nearly crying. Tripurari came up and preached to me. He told me I should pray to Lord Caitanya and Nityananda in times like this and not to worry about it. That is that this happens. So I got it together. And then about 10, 15 people in a row came and talked with me, and some of them took books. So when we discussed it afterward, we could understand that we were just instruments in Lord Chaitanya's hands. This is how we developed the Sankirtana philosophy. Through the book distribution, we came to realize who Prabhupada was and to appreciate him more. Lavangalatika. All day I would stand at the top of the stairs, and thousands of people would come by, and we could distribute hundreds and hundreds of books. We used to take lines from Prabhupada's book. Tripurari used to talk about the swans taking milk from water. So we used to use that a lot in approaching someone. We would say how these great sages used to know how to separate milk from water, separate the essence. He also said the pictures were windows to the spiritual world. We would say this book is like the brilliant sun that will drive away the darkness of ignorance in this age of Kali. I found the best way to distribute books, the books was to use Prabhupada's own words. Prabhupada said, if we read one line to someone, that person can make 100 times spiritual advancement. One time, a devotee complained to Prabhupada that people were throwing some of the books away. But then we could understand that Prabhupada wanted them distributed on a large scale, not that you kept the book for a special person you thought might be intelligent enough to read it. Because Prabhupada said that if they read only one line, they would be very much affected. So we could understand that Prabhupada wanted mass distribution, not that we just keep them for the special right person. Sura. Vaisheshika was selling books in the airport with me. He would walk up to people and say, well, how are you doing, sir? All glories to the Sri Krishna Sankirtana movement, the prime benediction for humanity at large, which cleanses the heart. He was repeating the Shikshashtaka prayers of Lord Chaitanya right out of the book, and yet he was selling books. The books had pictures of Krishna and devotional themes on the cover. And sometimes some devotees couldn't understand how people could relate to these books. But Prabhupada wanted them distributed, and he was saying that we should preach on the merit of the book. When a devotee asked Prabhupada what we should say to distribute the books, Prabhupada replied, Krishna Swadhamopagate, which is the verse that says the Srimad Bhagavatam is as brilliant as the sun and it has arisen just to give people religion in this stage of darkness. So we were also repeating that verse and distributing books on faith. We would go out and see the people actually becoming stuck by Krishna consciousness. They would see that the devotees were very sincere and serious, and they would become impressed. Daily on Sankirtana, we would see people appreciating Prabhupada's books. There was also harassment, but Prabhupada had talked about it, that there was always difficulty. So everything was there from Prabhupada to confirm whatever, whatever realization we had. Srila Prabhupada said, a book salesman would sometimes have difficulty because he will be sometimes accepted and sometimes rejected, but he tolerates. In the airport, we met professors, lawyers, all kinds of people who would stop and talk. They would challenge, and we would constantly have to defend Prabhupada's books and his movement and speak up on behalf of Prabhupada, more so than when we were just kids out of the parking lot talking to women and begging 50 cents for a pack of incense. We were presenting Prabhupada's book to the scholars, coming into contact with Mayavadis, scientists, businessmen, people who were very sharp in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and San Diego. People there were very sharp and hard, and just by having to spiritually combat them and defend the movement, we became more mature in our understanding of Prabhupada's book and how to present them in such a way that we could convince even people who didn't want to be convinced. We had to study Prabhupada's books. In 1974, several new parties formed just for distributing books. Tripurari had been traveling as an emissary from Los Angeles, but now with Srila Prabhupada's permission, he formed a Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, BBT, Sankirtana party of some leading book distributors. The BBT distributors stationed themselves in various airports around the country, creating a significant increase in book distribution. Your entire program is approved by me, Prabhupada. Prabhupada wrote to Tripurari. When Tripurari asked if he could take sannyasa, Prabhupada replied that he was already doing more than any sannyasi. In another letter, Prabhupada called him the incarnation of book distribution. Book distribution took another great stride forward when Tamala Krishna Goswami, Srila Prabhupada's General Secretary in India for 4 years, returned to the US. Joining with his friend Vishnu Janaswamy, he helped form the Radha Damodar Sankirtan party, traveling in a bus with the Radha Krishna deities to distribute books and hold festivals all over the US. Tamala Krishna Goswami. When we first began the Radha Damodar party, our idea was to make as many devotees as possible by holding festivals at which we chanted Hare Krishna and distributed prasadam. After Krishna sent so many nice young men, it was difficult to keep them always engaged. Then suddenly, a letter arrived from Srila Prabhupada in which he said that the Kirtana of book distribution was better than Kirtana of public chanting. This transcendental instruction changed the course of our Radha Damodar party. From then on, I concentrated more and more on book distribution, and this gave Prabhupada greater and greater pleasure. I had been in India for 4 years, but our main program had been enrolling life members. But now that I was in America, Srila Prabhupada was reminding me that reaching meant to distribute his books. So I became inspired that our party should distribute so many books that it equal all of the other book distributors, book distribution of the rest of ISKCON worldwide. Day and night, I was thinking of how to get out more and more books and thus overflood America with the transcendental literature. Srila Prabhupada wrote me that this was his real ambition to turn all of America into Vaishnavas. Until we formed Our Radha Damodara party, the method of distributing books had been that an individual would be given either a large, medium, or small book according to the size of the donation. But Prabhupada told me that of all types of book distribution, to distribute his large book was most important. So I was always considering how to increase the number of large books. The problem was that people were willing to give small donations, but rarely would they give us large enough contribution to award giving them a large book. Then Krishna gave me the idea that by adding together a few small donations from a number of persons, at least one of them could be given a large book, while the others could be given a back-to-head magazine or a small book. By this method, we were able to increase the distribution of big books tremendously. Prabhupada fully approved of this idea as long as book fund received payment for books. Srila Prabhupada allowed us to pass them out as quickly as we could, irrespective of the size of donations. Thus, our Radha Damodar party was able to distribute as many as 50,000 big books in a single month. Srila Prabhupada showed special interest in the Radha Damodara party and approved loans from the BBT for the purchase of more buses, thus creating a Sankirtana army traveling in renovated Greyhound buses. By the end of 1974, the Radha Damodar party had three buses, vans, and numerous men. Prabhupada called the buses moving temples, and he urged the Radha Damodara devotees to continue their program with certainty that they were pleasing Lord Caitanya. I am glad that you have understood the importance of my book, Prabhupada wrote. Therefore, I am stressing it so much. Let everyone take these books. Srila Prabhupada encouraged the Radha Damodara party to expand to hundreds of buses and thus fulfill a mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to bring Krishna consciousness to every town and village. When a tight transcendental competition arose between the Los Angeles Temple, Tripurari's BBT party, and the Radha Damodar party, Prabhupada watched and approved it with pleasure. Another party forming in 1974 was the BBT Library Party. It began with Hridayananda Goswami's sending some brahmacharis from the party to visit prestigious universities in New England. The men attempted to sell entire sets of Srila Prabhupada's books to the professors, and even in their first attempts, they met with great success. Srila Prabhupada had long cherished this idea, and even before coming to America, he had gone to libraries in India with copies of the Srimad Bhagavatam first canto. By his efforts in New Delhi, the United States Library of Congress had obtained copies of those early volumes. Now, his desire to see his book placed in all US libraries and universities was becoming a reality. Within a few months, professors began writing favorable reviews, and some even ordered Prabhupada's book for their college courses. I was very much sorry. I very much liked this program of the standing orders Prabhupada wrote. Try to increase it up to 50,000 such orders from the libraries. Another party that formed in 1974 was Namahatta, a group of brahmacharis led by two sannyasis. The Namahatta party would travel and distribute books, donating their profits towards Srila Prabhupada's projects in Bombay, Mayapur, and Vrindavan. When Srila Prabhupada became ill for several weeks in September 1974, the book distribution reports were his best medicine. Whenever I got report of my books selling, he wrote to the library party, I feel strength. Even now, in this weakened condition, I have got strength from your report. and during the same illness, he wrote to Rameshwara. Regarding book sales figures, please endeavor in this way. This is the only solace of my life. When I hear that my books are selling so nicely, I become energetic like a young man. Srila Prabhupada recovered his health, and by the end of 1974, his BBT was also in extraordinary health, with the temples again competing in a furious Christmas marathon. In America, the BBT reported to Prabhupada that approximately 387,000 hardbound books had been sold during the year, a 67% increase over the previous year, and almost 40 lakhs back to Godhead had been sold, and 89% increase. The American BBT sold the individual temples a total of 66 lakh 68,000 pieces of literature, a 60% increase. Such news made Srila Prabhupada become energetic like a young man, and Prabhupada and his book distribution movement headed into 1975 with all signs of increasing, doubling, and tripling, and the already astounding figure of 1974. Shall I continue? Prabhu? Srila Prabhupada had created his Bhaktivedanta Book Trust in 1972 as an independent entity to ensure that his books could continue being produced and distributed. The BBT would operate exclusively for the benefit of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, and yet it would exist independently. The trust document stated that the trustees should divide the money from the sale of books to ISKCON temples into two funds, one for printing books and one for purchasing ISKCON properties and building temples. Prabhupada believed that if this 50-50 formula were followed, Krishna would assure the success of ISKCON. Repeatedly, he would refer to this formula in conversation and letters, even in his purport on Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada gave his BBT trustees authority to make printing plans, and the trustees would then consult him for approval. He would set the standards and guidelines for his BBT trustees to follow. Only after consulting him could they institute changes. And to changes, Prabhupada was particularly averse. He would choose the book size, determine the artwork, and make suggestions about the size of a particular printing, but shipping policies about sales to temples, about almost every aspect of the BBT's publishing activities. Even when certain temples did not remit their payments to the BBT, Prabhupada would become involved. It is not good if such big temples who are setting the example for the whole society do not pay their bills. This is most irregular. I am trying to retire from the administrative affairs, but if the president and GBC men make such disturbances, then how can it be peaceful? Things should be maintained automatically. Then it will be peaceful for me. He was a strict manager. According to Vedic instructions, he said, fire, death, and disease should never be neglected. They must be extinguished by all means. Srila Prabhupada saw book distribution as, among other things, the basis for the economically sound ISKCON. Other businesses could also operate, but book selling was the best, for it combined teaching with a good source of income. As he wrote to one of his temple presidents, I am very much encouraged by the report of how nicely our books are being distributed. This is our main business all over the world. If you give full attention to this, there will never be any shortage of funds. And on another occasion, regarding the society's leaders emphasizing business, you should understand what is the meaning of business. Business means to help the preaching. Preaching needs financial help. Otherwise, we have no need for business. So as far I understand, our book business is sufficient to support our movement. Srila Prabhupada also oversaw all BBT loans to the temples. Any GBC secretary to temple or temple president requesting a loan would have to approach him. In 1973 and 1974, he granted sizable loans for building, purchasing, or improving temples in Dallas, Hawaii, Sydney, Chicago, and Vancouver. He also granted a loan to the Radha Damodara party for buying traveling temples or buses, and one to South America for printing books. Kirtanananda Maharaja automatically received a $50,000 loan each year for New Vrindavan. But Prabhupada would deny money requests for projects he considered inconsistent with the purpose of the BBT. On November 6, he wrote to Rameshwara, "No, we cannot load BBT money for any other purposes than what is mentioned in the BBT agreement. These other loans for cows, equipment, and restaurant must all be repaid, and no other loans other than for publishing and temple construction can be granted." Beginning in 1974, Srila Prabhupada utilized the BBT profits for constructing his main temples in India, Vrindavan, Mayapur, and especially Bombay. Rameshwara informed the devotees of the special function of the BBT. Srila Prabhupada is personally overseeing all the Indian programs and spending. If 1 rupee is misspent, Srila Prabhupada becomes disturbed and chastises the devotee mercifully. This money is earned by the sweat of many devotees. So why you are not careful? Srila Prabhupada wants to see our Vrindavan temple, the Sri Krishna Balaram Mandir, completed by Janmashtami. Prabhupada wants to establish the Mayapur temple as well. One interesting note in this connection is that in India, I have been told that 10 paise purchases 1 brick. 10 paise means US dollar 0.01. Just think, every penny you collect may buy 1 brick in India. Every penny counts towards these transcendental goals. These places in India, Prabhupada wrote, are spiritually potent. By establishing temples in Mayapur and Vrindavan, we assure that the purity of our movement will be kept intact. In October of 1974, Srila Prabhupada wrote.
Vaibhava, can you just pause for a few minutes?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Actually, I'm not speaking anything. This is like a flow of nectar. I don't want to interrupt in between. Let's continue with it. After some time, I'll say something.
Okay. In October 1974, Srila Prabhupada wrote to Hamsaduta, his GBC secretary for Germany, "Whenever there is any publication in any language, it enlivens me 100 times." Although Srila Prabhupada's order from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was to preach and publish in the English language, he had expanded that order to include all the languages and countries of the world. My first concern is that my books shall be published and distributed profusely all over the world. Srila Prabhupada had written to one of the first devotees in Europe in 1972. Prabhupada wrote always in English, but ever since 1968, when ISKCON had first begun spreading to other countries, he had been talking of printing his book in foreign languages. When in early 1973, a German edition of Bhagavad Gita had been printed, Srila Prabhupada had written Hamsaduta, "You have done the right thing by printing Bhagavad Gita in German language. And I very much appreciate that you have done this great service." By the summer, Sankirtana parties had been traveling throughout Germany, distributing several hundred copies of Bhagavad Gita a week. Hamsaduta had promised that he would translate one book a month into German. And when in the fall of 1974, Prabhupada heard of six recently printed German translations, he replied, "This is very happy news for me. Thank you. Overflood Europe with German books." Srila Prabhupada said that whenever he published a book, he felt that he had made book distribution his priority. Early in 1974, when the Spanish BBT was ready to print the translations of Srimad Bhagavatam, first volume, Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prabhupada wrote, by printing these books of our Krishna conscious philosophy in so many different languages, we can actually inject our movement into the masses of persons all over the world, especially those in the Western countries, and we can literally turn whole nations into Krishna conscious nations. When 100,000 copies of a Spanish Back to Godhead were printed, Srila Prabhupada wrote, "Now give them to everyone." Spanish book distribution became the second largest in the world next to America. Could you please cooperate? I think some one line is missing. Bhagavan, Srila Prabhupada's in representative in Southern Europe had been printing in French and Italian. And as early as December 1972, he had printed Prabhupada's Easy Journey to Other Planets in French. By the beginning of 1974, three parties in France were distributing daily 1,000 books, including a French Bhagavad Gita as it is. Already Bhagavan had printed the first Italian Back to Godhead, and a French Sri Upanishad was forthcoming. Wherever devotees went, they knew their program was to chant Hare Krishna, follow the regulative principles, and arrange for printing and distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. When the first devotees had reached South Africa, they had proceeded just according to Srila Prabhupada's desire, and he had replied to them, "Your report is very encouraging to me that you distributed 110 Gitas in 2 days in Cape Town." Srila Prabhupada often thought of having his books printed in Russian, and he wrote to the Minister of Education and Culture in the USSR suggesting they publish a translation of the ancient classical Vedic literature, namely Bhagavad Gita, as already published by the famous London publishing house of MSS Macmillan Company. He also talked with his disciples about printing Russian translations in America. Whenever Srila Prabhupada met an interested person proficient in any language, foreign language, he would request that person to translate his books. In 1972, he had written, I am also very encouraged to hear that Japanese language traditions of some of my books will be brought out soon, because without books and magazines, what authority or what basis have we got for preaching? Similarly, Srila Prabhupada had written to an American American devotee in Indonesia. "I am especially happy to hear that you have got a Chinese boy there who is doing some translating work." Yes, the Chinese speaking portion of the world is very huge, and it requires to infiltrate gradually, especially by distributing our literature widely in Chinese languages. So his service is the greatest in Krishna, greatest to Krishna. Later, when Prabhupada heard that the Chinese boy Yashomati Sutta had finished translating 3 chapters of Bhagavad Gita into Chinese, he wrote that they should immediately print those 3 chapters as a small book. ISKCON Australia rose to prominence in the book distribution competition and by 1974 was competing with Los Angeles ISKCON and the Radha Damodar Party for world leadership. By the fall of 1974, about a dozen top Australian and New Zealand distributors were selling daily more than 20 big books each. The centers in Australia, like those in America, more than doubled their book distribution between 1973 and 74. When book distribution had been just beginning in America in 1970, no books had been available in England. But within a year, Krishna book distribution had begun there, and Srila Prabhupada had written, all of my disciples in London Center are very intelligent, and they should unite around this single task of selling Krishna books widely throughout Britain. In 1974, the devotees in Britain were valiantly distributing books. During one busy 6-day period, they distributed 600 volumes of teaching of Lord Caitanya, 400 of Srimad Bhagavatam, and 1000 Back to Godhead magazines. India was special. There, Srila Prabhupada had introduced book distribution through the ISKCON Life membership program. Wealthy Indians were more inclined to accept the books as part of an ISKCON membership package, which included such benefits as free accommodation in ISKCON temples throughout the world. But in India, as elsewhere, Srila Prabhupada wanted his books distributed to colleges, to libraries, to prominent citizens, and to the masses. By the end of 1974, Prabhupada's disciples were ready to print Hindi and Bengali editions of Back to Godhead. When Srila Prabhupada heard that Western devotees in India were complaining of insufficient engagement, he replied, I am pleased you are selling many Krishna books daily. All our men should go out with the books. There is sufficient engagement. To his GBC secretary in India, he wrote, engage all of them in book distribution specifically and take with you some Sankirtana party. Without books, we will make no progress in India. Srila Prabhupada had written to Tejas, his temple president in Delhi. Prabhupada had also trained his leaders in India in the strict policy of 50-50. Proceeds from life membership or any other collection should go 50% to the BBT and 50% for construction and other projects. On his order, the American BBT had been making donations of books to India and by 1974 had donated $300,000 worth of literature. Although America was the leading pioneer in book printing and distribution, Prabhupada foresaw worldwide printing and distribution of his books, eventually to surpass that in the US. Srila Prabhupada had created transcendental competition among his disciples. In 1971, he had observed with pleasure Keshava in San Francisco leading the society in Krishna book distribution. Prabhupada had promised that he would leave Los Angeles and stay in San Francisco if Keshava out distributed his brother Karandhara. And over the years, he had continued to instigate such competition, fanning the fires of book distribution. He would encourage the leaders to send him reports, and then he would respond with letters, raising the book distribution fever ever higher. The whole of ISKCON waited to hear the latest quote from Prabhupada, inspiring them to go on and on. When Srila Prabhupada had given the lecture in January 1974, stressing distribute books, distribute books, distribute books. Several devotees in audience had vowed on the spot to dedicate their lives to do that to that instruction. And when Prabhupada had sent the handwritten note down from his room in Los Angeles, everyone should go with the Sankirtan party as soon as possible. That one line had created a spirit of sacrifice and dedication in the hearts of many disciples who felt themselves destined to take up that order as their life and soul. Although Rameshwara had been caught up by the waves of the Sankirtana ocean from the beginning, Srila Prabhupada cast Rameshwara's service when he wrote, make program to distribute our books all over the world. Our books are being appreciated by learned circles, so we should take advantage. Whatever progress we made is simply due to distributing these books. So go on and do not divert your mind for a moment from this. When devotees in London reported to Srila Prabhupada their increase in book and magazine sales, he responded by inviting them to compete. I have heard that in San Francisco, they are selling daily not less than 75 Krishna books. So I am very much encouraged to hear this. Now, take this spirit of transcendental rivalry and consult with Dayananda and the others there in England to become the first class booksellers. When writing to a sannyasi disciple preaching in Scotland, where the devotees were perhaps not fully aware of the scope of book distribution in the US, Srila Prabhupada mentioned the latest book scores from the New York and commented, New York is leading the list. Srila Prabhupada also inspired the society as a whole to compete with his previous year's efforts. Somehow, the book distribution must be doubled and tripled as far as possible. Do it. As soon as the BBT Library Party had been formed, Prabhupada had told the members to get 50,000 orders, and he had asked the Radha Damodar Party to expand to 100 buses. The competition was particularly high between Los Angeles, the Radha Damodar Party, and Australia. And Srila Prabhupada encouraged them all, like a maestro calling for a fortissimo from the orchestra. Srila Prabhupada was not giving careless, boastful instructions. The determination and sacrifice required to achieve these seemingly unattainable goals he knew well, and he wanted his devotees to work as he worked with the total dedication. He wanted them to try their utmost. He was this was the logic of hunting for the rhinoceros. He said, if a man attempting to shoot a rhinoceros failed, no one would criticize him. But if he succeeded, he would be considered wonderful. Prabhupada wrote to Rupanuga, your Sankirtana reports are very encouraging, especially that one girl, Gauri Dasi, has set all ISKCON women's record. Gauri Dasi has set all ISKCON women's record of 108 big books. This is very wonderful. Formerly, this would have been considered impossible, but now, by Krishna's grace, everything is becoming possible. Encourage them all to increase more and more. Some devotees became confused by their god brothers and god sisters, rousing calls for competitions and rivalry. This seemed like the rivalry of the material world, which they had hoped to live forever. Srila Prabhupada, however, explained the proper attitude of transcendental competitions. Competitions and profiteering spirit are always there in the living entity. It is not that they can be artificially removed in some matter. Factually, we saw in Russia that by removing competition and profit calculation from society, the people were not at all happy. And still, these things are going on. So we shall not expect that we are any different. Only difference is that our profit is for Krishna's pleasure and our competition is how to please Krishna more than someone else. Even amongst the gopis, there is competition to please Krishna and there is envy also. But this envy is not material, it is transcendental. They are thinking, oh, she has done something more wonderful than me. That is very nice. But now let me do something even more wonderful like that. So I am pleased that you are that you desire for competition with your god brothers to spread Krishna consciousness movement all over the world by printing our books. When a traveling Sankirtana party from one temple intensively distributed books in another city, the authorities at the local temple would often be disturbed. This problem came before Srila Prabhupada, who was inevitably called in to judge and to cool down the fires of competition. Prabhupada wrote to Keshava and Bhutatma, who had traveled all the way from San Francisco to London to distribute books, but had disturbed the devotees there by their fervor. Ultimately, it shall be up to the local temple president if the presence of your party is favorable or not. Everything considered, if he agrees, you may stay. Otherwise, if he judges it is unfavorable at the time, he may order you to go out. But just to avoid these things, better to arrange in advance with the GBC men concerned. Ours is a cooperative movement with Krishna and the advancement of the Krishna movement at the center. And we must continue to sell as many books as possible, but discuss everything amongst yourselves and do it nicely without irritating anyone. That is the art. Seeing the mighty efforts of the top book distributors, some devotees became envious or at least dispirited, thinking themselves useless and unable to please Srila Prabhupada. This problem also came before Srila Prabhupada, who replied, there must always be competition that gives life, that cannot be separated from life. The perfect society does not eliminate competition, but it eliminates envy because everyone is weak before Krishna. But competition had its limits, as Prabhupada explained to a doubting brahmachari in Florida. It is not so much important the quantity of books that we distribute, but that we serve Krishna as best we can and depend on Him for the result. But it should not come to the point of making us lose our Krishna consciousness. When you have these feelings, do not mistake it for enviousness, but take it for to be an indirect appreciation of the service done by your other god brothers. This is spiritual. In the material world, when someone surpasses us in some way, we become angry and plan how to stop him. But in the spiritual world, when someone does some better service, we think, oh, he has done so nicely. Let me help him to execute his service.
Okay, Mati, I think you can stop here for a
Yes.
few more. I think I'll just say a few things. Uh, One thing we see is that in this section of the Prabhupada Leelamrita, we see how book distribution began from 1970 uh, with an accidental discovery of selling Krishna book at the gas station. Instead of paying the gas station with money, they paid the Krishna book. And at that time, even selling 2 books a day was considered a miracle. And then gradually, one by one, they started experimenting, going door to door and things like that. And then not just door to door, traveling Sankirtan. And so the book distribution started really exploding. Uh, and with numbers, enthusiasm, the fervor of the devotees, it started exploding. And so Sankirtan parties started traveling, and Prabhupada gave Radha Damodar party a goal of 100 buses, as we can see. Uh, they were distributing books in the airport. We saw how they were distributing books in the mall, but due to the Vietnam War, so they stopped. They did not permit anyone to distribute books in private malls. But then the Supreme Court passed an order where government malls, due to freedom of right to free speech, was permitted. So devotees could go to the airport and distribute books or any public places. And we see how Prabhupada got the order to print to preach in the English speaking language. But Prabhupada even carried out uh, the task of printing the books in German, Italian, Spanish, and the whole thing was expanding. So that is the nature. Prabhupada, earlier we saw how Prabhupada says that is the nature of the spirit. It constantly keeps expanding. So Prabhupada created that wave of book distribution. You could say it's snowball. Snowball is like a small piece of snow which begins to roll down a hill, and it takes more snow along its path, and quite quickly it becomes huge. So like that, Prabhupada's book distribution in his ISKCON started in 1970, and by 1974 it had become humongous. We saw how during the Christmas marathon it was discovered. Uh, I mean, it just spontaneously happened 22nd, 23rd, 24th of December. Uh, I think it was 1973 or 74. Anyway, we read through that where the year is, I get confused with 73 or 74. Any case, uh, that was a spontaneous discovery. And book distribution constantly kept increasing. And here now, Prabhupada, one of the methods of increasing the book distribution is to create competition. But Prabhupada is very careful that this does not become material. So he clarifies in several letters that the idea is that in the spirit, in Krishna consciousness, somebody does better. We first of all appreciate and we think, how shall we do better than that? So we are not trying to become better than that by trying to block them, because everyone is trying to please Prabhupada, everyone is trying to serve Krishna. So the idea in Krishna consciousness is we become very appreciative if somebody does some wonderful service, and we think we will do better than that. It's not that we are better devotees, but we want to please Prabhupada more. So then that is called competition, not with the idea that we are better. The idea is to do better service, not that we are better. So Prabhupada is talking about competition, and Prabhupada says you cannot eliminate competition and profiteering. That's part of the nature of the spirit soul. But in its original form, it is very pure, and which can also be exhibited in the material world if one takes up some absolute activity like book distribution. So Prabhupada is saying how it should not be taken in a mundane spirit of okay, he's doing well. So envy means that okay, how to bring that person down, how to block that person. That's how material world operates. But in Krishna consciousness, we don't operate like that. We want everybody to rise. And seeing how much everybody is rising, we want to rise even higher. Rise means in terms of the service that we can offer to please Prabhupada, not rise in terms of our stature. Oh, we are dasa, dasa, to dasa. Stature wise, we want to remain the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of the Vaishnavas. But the service wise, we really want to excel. So that is the spirit that Srila Prabhupada is bringing out in these letters. So we saw how across the world, book distribution had really exploded. America, England, Europe, Spain, the Spanish speaking place, South America, Australia. So the whole world was getting caught up in book distribution. How Tamal Krishna Maharaj wanted, we saw that also, how Tamal Krishna Maharaj planned that the Radha Damodar party alone should surpass the whole world in book distribution. That was a goal which Tamal Krishna Maharaj set for the Radha Damodar party. So we can see this fervor, the enthusiasm, and it's purely transcendental, this whole endeavor to distribute books and please and distribute to print books and please and print and distribute these books is an attempt to please Prabhupada. It is fully transcendental. And there is nothing in the world which equals book distribution. The service of book distribution is the most intimate service that one can render to Krishna. Because Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that those who preach my glories are the most dear to me. So this is the dearmost service that one can render to Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas and to the Lord. Now one may think, okay, somebody is a cook. So how is that person engaged in book distribution? But the person who's cooking, they say our army runs on his tummy. So the book distributors need energy to go out and distribute books. So they're feeding the book distributors. So they're also participating in book distribution. Similarly, the pujaris in the temple, they're decorating the deities nicely so that the book distributors, by their efforts, are introducing so many people to Krishna consciousness. So when these people come to the temple, they can feel very happy by seeing the deities, very pleased by seeing the deities. So every activity in the Krishna conscious movement is related to book distribution. Means that is the best best method of bringing someone to Krishna consciousness. So everybody's constant meditation could be on our family business, which is book distribution. Any thoughts, reflections? This section is it's an amazing flow of nectar. It gets stronger and stronger and tastier and tastier, and it's just mind blowing, soul blowing, everything. Okay, please continue, Master.
Competition might have been a catalyst, but by steadfastly distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, the members of the Krishna conscious movement were experiencing the essence of loving service to Krishna in separation, which is the highest spiritual ecstasy. Don't try to see God, Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master had often said, but act in such a way that God sees you. In other words, by submissively acting on the order of the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, Prabhupada's disciples were sure to attract Krishna's loving attention. The quickest way to reach Krishna's to reach sorry the quickest way to catch Krishna's attention, Srila Prabhupada said, was to direct another person to Krishna consciousness. The book distributors therefore felt a special reciprocation with their spiritual master, and this impelled them to go on and distributing. Sanjaya. Philosophically, we saw that going out and distributing books was what our spiritual master wanted us to do. We knew that. That was clear to us. We also had a real sense of idealism that these books and magazines would change the world. Once you come to Krishna consciousness, you actually see how how crummy, how crummy
Bharti, your
the.
voice is breaking.
Is it okay, Prabhuji, now?
Yeah.
Okay. You actually see how crummy the world really is, how really contaminated things are, how envious people are, and how horrible material life is. You can see that. You don't feel that you yourself can change it, but you feel that whoever gets one of Prabhupada's books and looks at it will be changed in a spiritual way. There was no question about it. We also felt a big change would come in and the world come in the world in the future as Krishna consciousness spread. Prabhupada also said that if people just touch one of these books, their lives will change. Our faith was in the books and Srila Prabhupada. Keshav Bharati. When you pass out a book, there is a certain reciprocation from Prabhupada. There was a dramatic difference in our internal experience when a person would take a book compared to just taking some incense or something. We would actually experience Prabhupada's association all day by distributing these books. We didn't feel left out just because certain devotees were physically closer to Prabhupada. Book distributors always got strong enlivenment. We would read about Haridas Thakur's going out and rolling on the ground and begging people to chant. That kind of thing would inspire us. Vaisheshika. We had Prabhupada's books and different letters from him, and we also knew that if we distributed lots of books, we could get our name in the newsletter and we could think of how Prabhupada would read it. But I was just trying to keep up with the others. Sometimes I would go a couple of hours without giving anyone a book. Everyone else would just be passing them out like crazy. I would try, and people would all but spit in my face. They were pushing me around. It was very heavy for me. I would sometimes just walk off and start crying. It was so heavy, but I knew this book distribution was pleasing to Prabhupada, and I just wanted to be part of it. We used to think how Prabhupada was spending so much time behind a dictating machine just writing these books. We would meditate on how he would sleep just a few hours a day and minimize everything else to write these books. So we were also trying to cut down our other activities and just go out and distribute books. Prabhupada said a devotee should live in the mood of the six Goswamis. So we were singing those prayers every day. We felt a real connection. Even in the beginning, a devotee told me, "Where is Prabhupada? Do you know?" And then he said, "He is in his books." That mood was always there. We always felt that connection. I always wanted to do welfare work. I like the feeling of doing something for people. So this is the summum bonum of helping.
Bharti, I think you skipped a paragraph.
Oh, okay, sorry, Prabhuji. Jagadhatri Devi Dasi. When I was distributing Prabhupada's books, I understood that that was the most pleasing thing could do for him. I was helping him to fulfill his spiritual master's instructions, and so he was pleased. And he was even more pleased
if I did it nicely. I always used to hear the story about how Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati would be happy if someone went out and distributed even one magazine, because it's actually the mood of Sankirtana, of going out and trying to give mercy to the conditioned souls, that counts. I always wanted to do welfare work. I like the feeling of doing something for people. So this is the summum bonum of helping people. You are helping them to go back to Godhead. So that was my motivation, and we automatically become purified by bringing other living, living entities to Krishna, Tripurari. I got inspired mostly by Prabhupada's greatness, how he was staunchly following his Guru Maharaja. It was his Guru Maharaj's order, and therefore he was doing it. I was never very scholarly or intelligent. I never thought that I had much brains or talent. I was never trained practically in any kind of skill, and I didn't have much education. I took it like that I was talking to the most fallen people, and that I was the most fallen myself. I was just doing what Prabhupada wanted, because he wanted I would pray well, I would pray to Prabhupada to help me realize why he wanted book distribution. Then within I would get inspiration, and it would come out in all of my talks about book distribution. That time that I stayed out at the airport when all the devotees went back with Prabhupada to the temple very much affected my whole spiritual life. I was very much intimately connected with Prabhupada, but my closest association with him was by following his instructions and just getting down to work, and not trying to enjoy the spiritual master but serve him. Vrindavana Vilasini Devidasi. When Prabhupada gave that famous lecture in Los Angeles, distribute books, distribute books, distribute books, right then I wanted to take it up. Whenever he wrote to Rameshwara, it was really to Rameshwara and company. We all felt included. We are all eternal book distributors, a team together, and I wanted to be part of it. It was Lord Chaitanya's eternal Sankirtana party, and we all wanted to be part of it. It's going on in every planet, in every universe. I know it is pleasing to Srila Prabhupada. I would relate to book distribution like the Battle of Kurukshetra. It's a battle, but Krishna is right there. It's like Kurukshetra number two. I'm sure all book distributors feel like that. You feel like Krishna is right there and he is going to win. You just have to take shelter of him. You may not win this battle, but you win the overall war. So I always felt connected with Prabhupada, because he's telling us in his books about the great devotees that we can take shelter of. It's all by his mercy. It's giving us, he is giving us these books, and he is in these books. Surah. We were so much addicted to selling Prabhupada's books that we didn't want to do anything else. We would just go straight to the airport and start distributing, and not stop, except for maybe a 20-minute lunch break and maybe some reading for 20 minutes. Otherwise, non-stop, 7:30 or 8 at night. We really felt that Srila Prabhupada was protecting us. One time, out of the airport, I was given a BBT newsletter. Maybe it was due to the exhaustion, or maybe it was due to some false sentimentally mentality or whatever. But I was reading Prabhupada's remarks about book distribution, and I became very moved. It was by myself at the airport. I was by myself at the airport. and I just started crying because I thought of how devotees all over the world are so beautiful, so wonderful hearted, distributing books and working so hard. I was just really appreciating Prabhupada and the Krishna consciousness movement. Prabhupada had said something in the newsletter about book distribution, and it just touched me. We were so absorbed in books, books, books that whenever Prabhupada would say anything about book distribution, we would go nuts. That meant it was our connection to Prabhupada. We weren't big guns who could sit at a meeting with Prabhupada or get personal attention so much. Maybe during some morning walks at the Mayapur festival, we got to sneak in with the sannyasis. But otherwise, our book distribution was our connection with Prabhupada. When he would mention something about book distribution, it would be our life and soul. Lavangalatika Devidasi. Having heard Srila Prabhupada speak and knowing that he was always reading from these books, the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that he was preaching that you have to distribute this knowledge to others, made it all very simple. That is, you just knew that this was Srila Prabhupada's desire. He was always telling us that he was giving us this knowledge, and that once you have this knowledge, you have to distribute it to others. Srila Prabhupada came to America to preach with his disciples, so we must do it because it's Prabhupada's desire. He spent so much time translating these books to be distributed. You just want to distribute to others, and you want people to have these books in their homes. Vrindavana, India, April 20, 1975. Srila Prabhupada installed the deities for the grand opening of the Krishna Balaram Mandir. Almost 1,000 disciples were present, and the governor of Uttar Pradesh was the guest of honor. After years of hard endeavor, the grand opening was a climatic triumph for Srila Prabhupada and his movement. While still standing at the altar after having offered the first arati to Krishna and Balarama, Prabhupada addressed the crowd, explaining that this was an international temple where people from all over the world would come to worship and take shelter of Gaurnitai, Krishna Balaram, and Radha Krishna. Later that evening, Srila Prabhupada sat in the room with a few GBC men, the buttons on his kurta open because of the heat, his legs and bare feet extended under the low table. He relaxed, and his men sat close around him in the dim lit light of the desk lamp. It was a milestone, he said, but still they had to go forward, not merely savor this success. Many things were still required to make the temple and guest house operative. Srila Prabhupada was thinking beyond Vrindavana. This temple construction is so important, he said, that I am willing to spend many lakhs to open a temple like this. And yet, as important as it is, the book production is even more important. This was a significant reaffirmation of the priority of book production, even while in the midst of this splendid temple opening, he was stressing that book production was more important. Srila Prabhupada seemed displeased, however, because for months his Chaitanya Charitamrita had been delayed by his Sanskrit editor. He said with a scowl that although he had finished the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it remained unpublished. He had also completed all 4 volumes of the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam and was beginning the fifth. At only 1 volume of the fourth canto had been published. One of the devotees present, not understanding Prabhupada's point, remarked that since Prabhupada was going next to Hawaii, he would be able to write there in peace and quiet. Prabhupada replied that he was not encouraged to write when his manuscripts were not being published. The BBT press, after several years in New York, was about to relocate to Los Angeles, where Rameshwara would become the new BBT press supervisor. Rameshwara, unaware of the delay in publishing the Chaitanya Charitamrita manuscript, learned of it now in Vrindavana. He promised Prabhupada that he would immediately get the press set up in Los Angeles and begin producing Chaitanya Charitamrita. That Srila Prabhupada had completed the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita manuscript in 18 months during 1973 and 74 was a remarkable feat. In those same months, he had been intensely engaged in many affairs of management while constantly traveling. He had confronted major problems with the leaders who had left their posts. He had personally attended to GBC during duties in India, and he had dealt with other ISKCON managerial affairs. He had authorized many large BBT loans and had approved the expansion and development of ISKCON in all areas of the world. In addition to responding regularly to large volume of mail, speaking daily to guests, and giving Bhagavatam lectures wherever he went. His only time for writing had been on arising at 1 in the morning, and he had persistently worked 2 or 3 hours each day. While Srila Prabhupada traveled from Vrindavana to Australia, Rameshwara and Radha Vallabha worked in Los Angeles to establish the new BBT offices. Prabhupada was still meditating on his completed Chaitanya Charitamrita manuscript waiting to be published. From Australia, he wrote, the Chaitanya Charitamrita is complete, 12 parts, and only 3 parts are published. And now the fifth canto is almost finished. So why these books are not being published? This is our first business. Immediately, these pending books, 17 in total, must all be published. Why the delay? The US printers binding is better than Dai Nippon. So some may be printed in the US and some in Japan, but the pending books must be finished in a very short time. When I see so many books pending, it does not encourage me to translate. When I see books printed, I become encouraged to write more and more. We can talk this over more in Hawaii. Now you and Hamsaduta expedite the publishing work. This is your business and push on the selling. You request Tripurari Maharaja in this connection along with others. Now Bhavananda Swami and Gargamuni Swami are there. They are also expert in publishing this on. By combined effort, publish as quickly as possible and immediately Chaitanya Charitamrita should be done. In Los Angeles, Rameshwara had only completed the lease arrangements for the new building for the press. The BBT artists had just arrived, and editors, proofreaders, and other production workers would soon be coming. The press had purchased a computer typesetter, and the devotees were being trained to use it. Carpenters knocked down walls to build a photo lab and dark room. Additional plumbing had to be installed, and the entire press had to be set up within 1 month. Srila Prabhupada was coming in June, and everything would have to be ready and running. By the time Srila Prabhupada reached Hawaii in May, the press in Los Angeles was preparing for operation. Srila Prabhupada's secretary phoned Los Angeles often. Prabhupada is angry. He keeps talking about the unpublished books. You'd better be prepared when he arrives. Rameshwara and Radha Vallabha had investigated the necessities and the difficulties in printing the Chaitanya Charitamrita manuscript, which they concluded would come to 17 volumes. One of the main problems they discovered was the lack of an expert Bengali editor. Most of the Chaitanya Charitamrita was in Bengali, although the BBT editors were experienced in Sanskrit because they were not proficient in Bengali. The work was progressing slowly. Also, Srila Prabhupada wanted many paintings in his books, and the art department would need many months to meet this request. Never before had the BBT lagged so far behind Srila Prabhupada. Rameshwara and Radha Vallabha training their brains to produce books quickly and efficiently devised a stepped up production schedule. By the end schedule, they could publish a book every 3 or 4 months. But on the new schedule, they decided they could produce a book a month. In that way, they would eventually catch up with Srila Prabhupada. Rameshwara was eager to present Prabhupada with this plan when he came to Los Angeles. More phone calls from Prabhupada's secretary. Prabhupada had heard about the preparation of the press building, but he had also heard that his name had not been displayed on the front of the BBT building. He was always insistent to preserve ISKCON's disciplic succession, foreseeing that unless ISKCON stressed A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami as the founder Acharya, in the future, persons might claim their rights of ISKCON leadership or of ownership of ISKCON properties. In the rush for completing the building, the BBT managers had overlooked this important detail. June
Yes, Mother, you
29.
can stop there.
Yes.
You can stop there. We'll resume from the next section. The famous order comes to the next section. The famous order from Srila Prabhupada, Chaitanya Charitamrita printing. Okay, any thoughts, reflections? One thing that I wanted to mention was how Prabhupada had built a big temple in Vrindavan, and Prabhupada is interested in building such big temples to attract the masses to Krishna consciousness. But even there, he clarifies that book distribution is more important is a more important priority. Book printing and distribution is more important priority than temple construction. That should never be forgotten. So that continues even until this day. The priority, number one priority is book printing and distribution. Any thoughts, reflections, questions?
Just I wanted to thank you again for
Yes.
this Prabhupada Leelamrita Prabhuji, because now today I'm here in Vrindavan Prabhuji. So morning I attended Guru Puja and I was in Prabhupada Samadhi for morning Mangalarti, and I was so like.
Can you speak a little closer to the mic? I mean,
Yes. Sorry, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, really, I wanted to tell that today I was attending Mangalarti in Vrindavana. So when I was in Prabhupada Samadhi, I was feeling so close, or so, I don't know what feeling was that for Prabhupada. So much of respect, or so much of love for him. And this is really, I thought this, I think, because of we are reading this book, Prabhuji, of Leelamrita, really, which is making me so grateful to Srila Prabhupada for giving me this chance and this Krishna consciousness to me. It was really awesome experience in the morning. Just I wanted to share it, Prabhuji.
There is a strong presence of Srila Prabhupada in his books, in his murtis, in Mayapur, Vrindavan, and also in his rooms. Very strong presence of Prabhupada.
Yes,
Of course, that anybody can feel to a certain extent, but those who actually study his books and follow his teachings can perceive it with greater intensity, greater love,
Mm. Yes,
because spiritual transcendental subject matters are not accessed by our effort. They're revealed by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, the Prabhupacharyas, and the Lord. They have to reveal themselves, then we get access to them.
yes,
Very potent places, especially Prabhupada Samadhi and Vrindavan.
yes, Prabhuji. It's very, very much. That was the real feeling. And really, I thank you for this class, Prabhuji. Really, I thank you for bottom of my heart.
Yeah, we have a whole group of devotees. So reading the Leelamrita and the association of devotees makes a big difference than just reading alone.
Yes,
There is
Prabhuji.
great potency when everybody gathers together to
Yes,
read Prabhupada Leelamrita.
yes. Because I had once read already all the volumes of like Leelamrita, but this is the second time. But this is more relishing. That's what I read
And you're also
myself.
enthusiastic to read.
Yes, yes.
But what did you say? Your friend?
No, Prabhuji, I told that I had read one really on myself, like all the volumes. But now here we are while discussing this class is more relishing than what I read before once.
But sorry, can you speak a little closer to the mic? I couldn't hear you.
I know. I think there is some disturbance with the internet, Prabhuji.
Now it's okay. Now we can hear you better.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was just telling Prabhuji because the reading here together was more relishing for me than which I read alone before.
Yes, whenever we read, whatever we perform, the association of devotees is more relishable, it's more potent.
Yes.
This is the Sankirtan movement. The more we do things together, the stronger it is. Even Japa, if we start with the association of devotees, it has a stronger impact on our consciousness. Thank you. So please pray for all of us, Srila Prabhupada.
Yes, Prabhuji, sure, Prabhuji. For everyone, for whole of ISKCON community, everyone, so that they have better devotional life, they can do it better, Prabhuji, always. When we see so many devotees coming to the temple, it looks really wonderful. We may feel, really once I felt that, Prabhuji, so many people are, it is so rushed because before and all, in the beginning when I went to temple and all, there was not so much rush. We could have nice darshan. Now it is, to get darshan, it is very difficult. We have to stand in a rush and all. Then I thought how wonderful that Prabhupada has given. He has brought so many devotees here to have darshan of his lordships. So that is more greater than our having only the darshan, and for
Correct.
our convenience and our happiness or our selfishness, that more
Correct.
people are coming. That is what I realized when I came here and had darshan in that so much rush, because it is Saturday, Sunday, and it is really, really too much crowded. Prabhu.
Yeah. The more, the merrier.
Yes. Yes, Prabhu.
Anyone else? Who else would like to share their reflections or thoughts or questions? Hare Krishna Prabhuji, it's very enlightening to read. The desire to do book distribution is becoming strong on reading Prabhuji. Oh, it's a message to me. Is it? I thought it's a message in the chat. Thank you, Vrajapremi Kamataji. my son trying to look and see what's going on. Who are the people here? Okay, so we'll resume again next Sunday. Thank you all very much for joining. Prabhupada ki jai. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyo cha pataro bhavadibhyo vaishnavyo.